another story for another day. Michael Savage, radio talk show host, very controversial in this country. He's banned in the UK. In fact, if he sets foot in Britain, he will be arrested for hate speech. Now, you've heard Michael Savage's broadcasts, and they are hateful. They're very opinionated. He offends everybody. You can't do that in England. You can't do that in the UK. If he steps foot in the UK, he goes to jail. Tom Likas, his show was banned in Canada for hate speech. Okay, and maybe now you know. You ever watched BBC broadcast, BBC programming, or CBC, which is the Canadian broadcasting company? You ever wonder why their broadcasting is programming is so dull? That's why. Because you cannot offend anybody, anywhere, anytime, call anybody a name, speak negatively against them. It's against the law. When you do that, you become very, very boring. In fact, in the UK, a statement like, if you come to this country, you have to speak English. I read a story about this in The Guardian. Think about that statement. If you come to this country, you have to speak English. People say that in this country all the time, okay? That can be considered hate speech, and you can be arrested for saying that in Britain. In other words, the conversation will never be brought up because nobody wants to go to jail. Now, you can go round and round saying that that's something you should say or shouldn't say, or if somebody in this country should come to this country or Britain should be forced to speak English or not. That's a conversation you can have. And you can say yes or no. But to not ever even bring it up? Really? That's how it is in the UK. Okay, now that I've set the guidelines, let's go back to this whole Don Cherry controversy. This is what really piqued my interest this week. Don Cherry is a former NHL player, former NHL coach. He did a show called Coach's Corner on Canadian television. Okay, he did it for years. He's 85 years old. He's done this for many, many years. And he was fired for his racist rant. Okay. Now, I was in Canada last week, okay? And in Canada, during a certain time of year, like this time of year, they have a program. They have a campaign called Poppies for the Troops. And what you do, you go into various stores and you buy a poppy. And it's just a little plastic flower that you wear on your lapel. You put some money into the little can where the poppies are. And you wear this poppy in support of the troops, and the money goes to help former veterans, disabled veterans, veterans down on their luck, okay? It's their campaign, okay? It's the poppy program. They do it every year. And Don Cherry commented on the poppy program and immigrants. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and read what he had to say, what his racist rant was as to why they fired him, okay? Now, he's always been controversial, and he's almost been fired before just by calling people names like calling Sidney Crosby a hot dog on the Pittsburgh Penguins because he didn't like him sliding on his knees to celebrate a goal. Yeah, criticized for calling a hockey player a hot dog. Okay, he didn't like the Washington Capitals star Alex Ovechkin's celebration after he scored his 50th goal. Again, called him a hot dog. But the statement he actually made, let me find it here. I'm going to find it in just a second here. Okay, here's what he said, okay? Here's what Don Cherry said. The racist remark, and this was in USA Today. Don Cherry was fired for making a racist comment on the air. And here it is in quotation, so I'm going to read it exactly as he said it. Talking to immigrants to Canada. You people love our way of life, love our milk and honey, Cherry said. At least you could pay a couple of bucks for poppies or something like that. These guys paid for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada. That's it. They fired him for that. I'm going to read it again. You people love our way, and again, talking to immigrants to Canada, you people love our way of life, our milk and honey. At least you could pay a couple of bucks for poppies or something like that. These guys paid for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada. That was called a racist rant, and Don Cherry was fired for it. True story. Now, here's the problem. Here's the problem. He was fired. He was fired for that racist statement. Here's the problem. It wasn't a racist statement. Race was never mentioned. He didn't say you people from the Indian subcontinent. He didn't say you people from the Caribbean. He didn't say you people with black or brown faces. He just said immigrants. Could have meant immigrants from England. Could have meant immigrants from the United States, okay? Didn't mention race, but was fired for a racist statement. That was the problem, that race wasn't even mentioned, and he was fired for making a racist statement. Now, that's the problem. But here's the real problem. What Cherry said was definitely against the law in Canada. In other words, you can't say, well, Cherry said that's not against the law. He was railroaded. No, he wasn't railroaded. What he actually said, a statement like that, you can't say that on the air in Canada. It really is banned. It really is against the law. So there's a good chance they had no alternative but to fire him because he broke Canadian law. Now, the real problem with this thing, most of the Canadian media applauded the firing of Don Cherry. The best support he received were those who suggested that he apologize and then maybe we can reinstate you. They can't come out in full support of Cherry. Why? Because that's against the law. Their support of a hate speaker is considered hate speech, and they can be fired too. Isn't that bizarre? Now, here's the other thing about Canadian law that's interesting. Hate speech like that is against the law, but if you speak out about a hate speaker, you're allowed to hate speak. Here's an example. Toronto Star columnist Bruce Arthur, he called for Cherry to be fired as soon as his comment was made. He then called Cherry, and I'll quote this exactly as he said it. This is Bruce Arthur from the Toronto Star. He said, Cherry is the closest thing we have to a high priestess in hockey in a country obsessed with hockey. Don Cherry's a man. And this Bruce Arthur called him a high priestess. He didn't use the proper pronoun, I guess, noun. But Don Cherry is not a woman. He's a man. And this Bruce Arthur called him the closest thing we have to a high priestess of hockey in Canada. High priestess? What about Canadians' gender-neutral pronoun law? Okay? Translation. If you're part of the crowd carrying the torch to Dr. Frankenstein's castle, you can basically say whatever you want and do whatever you want. That's how it works in Canada, folks. Okay? I didn't write their laws, but that's how it is in Canada. Now, some of you may be saying, Strong, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, because I've said many, many times that we don't need all the hate speak that we have in this country. We need to be civil. We don't need to call names. I've said that many times. And I hear you saying, well, here's a guy who's calling names. You think he's the second coming of Christ. No, I don't think he's the second coming of Christ. I'm saying he said something that was at best controversial, not racist at all, because race was never mentioned, and they fired him. However, they fired him because he broke a law. Okay? That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that you need to speak kindly in conversation. You don't need to just throw names or throw bombs, especially in a conversation where you're trying to accomplish a goal. I'm not talking about entertainments. I'm not talking about movies. This is a sports broadcaster, for crying out loud. There's almost nothing factual that's ever done in sports. Oh, the Cardinals lost that game 1-0. They couldn't hit their way out of a paper bag. Well, yeah, you know what? They could hit their way out of a paper bag, but that's hyperbole. It's used in sports all the time. If you take opinion out of sports, nobody would go. Okay? So if you're speaking about entertainment, if you're in a comedy club, if you're just talking amongst a couple of guys or a couple of gals, okay, and you say something, that's different. I'm talking about being civil, first of all, in everyday life. Somebody does something nice for you, you say thank you. If somebody thanks you, you say you're welcome. You smile and greet people, good morning. If you're having a conversation with somebody, you have a civil conversation. If you disagree with them, you can give them facts as to why they're perhaps mistaken, but you don't call them a name. That's what I mean by speaking kindly and considerably, okay? Now, I don't care for Bill Maher or Rachel Maddow or Jon Stewart or Trevor Noah or John Oliver or Stephen Colbert. Don't care for them. I find them offensive, I find them divisive, and I don't find them very entertaining. So guess what? I don't watch them. But many people do. And good for them. They should be allowed to continue doing whatever they want to do, however they want to do it, the way they do it. They should certainly be allowed to. And they use hyperbole. They use double entendre. They use satire, as do many people, as do I in my podcast, okay? You've got to do everything you can to make a broadcast entertaining, okay? Because if you don't, you've got the BBC or the CBC. And by the way, you say, well, if they're boring, no one's going to watch them. Folks, that's about all they have in that country. It's state-run media, okay? That's 90% of what they have. You don't have a choice. You know what most people watch in Canada? Now, remember, most Canadians live within about 100 miles of the U.S. border, even less. Most of them watch U.S. television. They watch the TV stations from Buffalo or Watertown or Syracuse or Burlington, okay? That's what they watch. Or Detroit. They don't watch their dopey CBC because it's boring, okay? They watch U.S. television. You have to know the difference between calling somebody a name and slandering and using comedy or hyperbole or double entendre when speaking. Okay, slander's bad. Slander is always bad, okay? You cannot slander somebody. It's against the law. And it should be, okay? All else, it's pretty good, or at least acceptable. I'll give you an example. I'm going to make a statement. Rosie O'Donnell is a fat pig. Now, that's not hate speech if you're just making a statement about Rosie O'Donnell. Now, if Rosie O'Donnell were sitting across from me on a podcast and we were trying to debate let me think of something real quick, the importance of women in movies, okay? And I called her a fat pig, that would be, why would you do that? It doesn't add to the conversation. But to just make a statement that Rosie O'Donnell is a fat pig, that's not hate speech, and I'll tell you why. Because she jumped into the name-calling arena years ago. In other words, if you dish it out, you need to accept it. She dishes it out all the time, so she needs to accept it, okay? Some say, same thing with President Trump, okay? Now, where a civil discussion needs to apply always is during a debate and a conversation where a goal is in mind. Let me give you an example. If you're in a political discussion about the presidency, as they do on these news channels all the time, if you're in a political conversation about Donald Trump, you can say, and if you say, you can say whatever you want, but if you say, during Trump's presidency, trade has dropped X amount of percent, okay? Trade is good for the economy, so Trump's policies are going to hurt the economy. That's an opinion based in fact. It's helpful. If you're trying to make your argument, that's something you can say. It's factual, okay? And it makes points that enforce an opinion. If you say Trump is a fat moron and his wife is a whore, well, that's not factual or helpful, okay? It does, however, prove that the speaker has no opinion based in fact and that his views should be dismissed. And that, my friends, is very different from banning what he says. Let me give you a better example. Louis Farrakhan What if we had hate speech in this country? What if Louis Farrakhan was not allowed to say all the things about Jews and gays and whites and Christians that he says all the time?